What's the most scared you've ever been? My friend Chloe begged me to watch her boutique while she went to court to get a restraining order against Wilson, the employee she'd fired last week after he attacked her. I got to the shop at 9 and Chloe was already a nervous wreck, showing me how to lock the door from inside and where the panic button was under the register. She said Wilson didn't know about the court hearing today but to keep the door locked anyway, and only let in customers who knocked. Her hands were shaking as she gave me the keys and said she'd be back by noon at the latest. I locked the door behind her and flipped the sign to "by appointment only," like she'd told me. The first hour was quiet, just me reorganizing displays and trying not to think about this Wilson guy who'd apparently thrown Chloe into a wall when she'd fired him for stealing. Around 10:30, a woman knocked wanting to browse and I let her in, watching the street the whole time she shopped. She left without buying anything and I locked up again immediately. At 11, I started feeling better because Chloe would be back soon. Then I saw someone across the street watching the store. My blood went cold because it matched the photo Chloe had shown me of Wilson. I texted Chloe asking when she'd be done but got no response. Probably couldn't have her phone on in court. Wilson flicked his cigarette away and started crossing the street, not hurrying, taking his time like he knew I was trapped. I double-checked the door lock and moved behind the counter where the panic button was. He walked right up to the glass door and knocked 3 times, polite like a customer. When I didn't move, he knocked again, harder, then pressed his face against the glass, cupping his hands around his eyes to see inside. We made eye contact and he smiled, pointing at the door handle, mouthing, "Open up." I shook my head and he knocked again, so hard the glass shook. Then he held up something and my stomach dropped because it was Chloe's wallet. He pointed at it, then at the door, still smiling. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but he shook his head and held up his other hand with Chloe's car keys, jangling them. He mouthed, "She's hurt," and pointed down the street, then back at the door. I was frozen, not knowing if he'd actually done something to Chloe or if he'd stolen her stuff. But then he pulled out his phone and showed me a photo through the glass, and I couldn't breathe because it was Chloe's car with the windshield smashed. He backed up a few steps and I thought maybe he was leaving, but then he pulled a crowbar from inside his hoodie and swung it at the door. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. He hit it again and the crack spread further. I pressed the panic button but had no idea how long security would take. He kept hitting the glass, each blow making the cracks bigger, chunks starting to fall inside. I called 911 but they told me units were at least 10 minutes out. Wilson heard me on the phone and started swinging harder, faster. The hole in the glass was getting bigger and he reached through trying to unlock the door from inside but couldn't quite reach the bolt. I grabbed a display pole and swung at his arm but he pulled it back and laughed. He went back to smashing with the crowbar and now half the door was gone. I ran to the back office looking for another exit but there was only the front door and a window that was painted shut. When I came back, Wilson had cleared enough glass to step through and was climbing into the store. I held the display pole like a weapon but he had that crowbar and was bigger than me. "Where's the cash?" he said, way too calm. I told him Chloe hadn't done anything wrong and he laughed, saying she'd stolen from him first, owed him commissions. He swung the crowbar and shattered a display case, jewelry flying everywhere. "Every piece in here should be mine," he said, smashing another case. I tried to edge toward the door but he moved to block me, raising the crowbar. "You're going to open that register," he said. I told him I didn't know the code but he grabbed my shirt and shoved me against the counter. His breath smelled like beer and cigarettes and his eyes were bloodshot. He pressed the crowbar against my throat and said, "Try harder." I punched in random numbers and the register beeped angrily. He pushed the crowbar harder against my windpipe and I couldn't breathe. "Last chance," he said. I was seeing spots when we both heard sirens in the distance. His face twisted with rage and he raised the crowbar above his head, and I knew he was going to cave my skull in before the cops arrived. The crowbar starts coming down and I twist hard to the right, raising the display pole with both hands. The metal crashes together with a horrible clang that makes my teeth hurt. The impact throws me sideways into the jewelry case and glass digs into my hip. Wilson stumbles from the deflected blow and almost loses his balance. I scramble around the counter's other side, screaming as loud as I can. The sirens are getting louder and I just need to survive another 30 seconds. He lunges after me but slips on broken glass, going down hard on one knee. His hand shoots out to catch himself and the crowbar clatters across the floor. I grab the phone from the counter and throw it at his head as hard as I can. It bounces off his shoulder and he curses, trying to stand back up. I knock over a display rack to block his path and necklaces scatter everywhere. He kicks through them and reaches for the crowbar again. The door frame fills with uniforms and suddenly there's shouting everywhere. "Drop the weapon! Get on the ground!" 3 officers rush through the broken door with their guns drawn. Wilson spins toward them, still holding the crowbar, and they all move at once. They tackle him into the broken glass and he goes down hard, yelling about his commissions. One officer pins his arm while another grabs the crowbar and tosses it away. They flip him over and cuff his hands behind his back while he keeps shouting that Chloe owes him money. My legs give out and I slide down the wall, finally able to breathe but unable to stop shaking. Everything happened so fast and now it's over and I can't process any of it. An EMT named Reese Stratton kneels beside me, checking my throat where the crowbar left marks. She shines a light in my eyes and asks me to follow her finger, while another EMT looks at my shoulder. There's a bruise already forming where the first swing connected when we blocked each other. Reese tells me to take slow breaths and checks my pulse, saying something about shock. Officer King Howard walks over holding his phone and shows me a photo. It's Chloe's actual car with the windshield completely smashed, found 2 blocks from the courthouse. My stomach drops realizing Wilson really did attack her car before coming here. He must have followed her this morning and waited for her to go inside. Howard asks if I need to sit down somewhere more comfortable, but I can't move yet. My phone rings and it's Chloe, sobbing and apologizing from the courthouse bathroom. She just heard what happened from someone who saw the police cars outside her shop. She's racing back, but traffic is bad and she's 15 minutes away. I tell her I'm okay, even though I'm not sure that's true. The officers start bagging everything as evidence. They put the crowbar in a clear bag along with Chloe's wallet and keys Wilson had. They collect pieces of glass with blood on them from where he fell. Officer Howard sits next to me on the floor and takes my initial statement. I tell him everything from when I first saw Wilson across the street to when they tackled him. He writes it all down in a small notebook and asks me to spell my name twice. We're sitting on the store's front step now because they need to process the inside. I'm still shaking and can't seem to stop no matter how many deep breaths I take. Howard gives me a case number written on a business card. He says I need to go to the ER for my throat and shoulder, then come to the station later for a full statement. I nod, but I'm thinking about the destroyed door and all of Chloe's merchandise sitting exposed. Anyone could walk in and take whatever they want before she gets here. Howard must see what I'm thinking because he says they'll have an officer stay until Chloe arrives. Reese comes back over and says we really should get me checked out at the hospital. She's worried about my throat because injuries there can swell up hours later. The idea of my throat closing up when I'm alone tonight makes me agree to go. They help me stand and my legs are still wobbly, but I can walk. Wilson is in the back of a police car now, still yelling through the window about money. I don't look at him as we pass, but I can feel him watching me. Reese guides me to the ambulance and helps me sit on the back step. She takes my blood pressure again and listens to my breathing with a stethoscope. Another EMT brings over an ice pack for my shoulder, and it feels good against the throbbing. I watch 2 more police cars arrive and officers start putting up yellow tape around the storefront. A small crowd has gathered across the street, everyone holding up their phones to record. This is probably already on social media, and I wonder if my mom will see it. Reese asks if there's anyone I want her to call, but I shake my head. I'll deal with all that later when I can think straight again. Reese keeps checking my throat and tells me these injuries can swell up hours later and block my airway completely. She describes how the tissue gets inflamed slowly, and I might not notice until I can't breathe at all. The thought of being alone in my apartment when my throat closes makes me climb into the ambulance without arguing. They strap me to the gurney and start an IV while we drive to the hospital with no sirens. The ER is crowded, but they take me straight back because of the throat injury. A nurse checks my vitals again and a doctor orders x-rays of my neck and shoulder. The x-ray tech positions me different ways and tells me to hold still while the machine clicks. Back in the exam room, they put ice on my shoulder and the doctor shows me the images on a computer screen. There's dark bruising all along my windpipe and something called a bone bruise where the crowbar first hit my shoulder. The doctor says I'm lucky because a direct hit could have crushed my windpipe completely. They give me prescriptions for pain meds and tell me to rest my voice for a few days. While I'm waiting for discharge papers, a detective walks in wearing a gray suit. She introduces herself as Detective Safia Penn and asks if I'm up for giving my full statement. She pulls out a recorder and has me go through everything from when Chloe first asked me to watch the shop. I tell her about Chloe showing me the panic button and how scared she was this morning. Penn asks specific questions about Wilson's behavior and what exactly he said about commissions. She wants to know every detail about him showing me Chloe's wallet and the photo of the smashed car. I describe how he swung the crowbar and broke through the door piece by piece. She has me explain exactly how he grabbed me and pressed the crowbar against my throat. Penn asks me to describe his breathing and if I noticed alcohol on his breath. The door flies open and Chloe rushes in with mascara streaked all down her face. She's apologizing over and over and trying to hug me while sobbing about how sorry she is. Part of me wants to be mad at her for not warning me better about how dangerous Wilson was. But she looks so broken and scared that I just let her hold me while she cries. Penn waits for Chloe to calm down, then explains what she's figured out so far. Wilson probably followed Chloe to the courthouse this morning and waited for her to go inside. He smashed her car window to steal her wallet and keys, then came to the shop. Penn says the fact that he planned it all out makes the charges way more serious. Chloe keeps saying she should have told me more about his temper and his drinking problem. Penn takes notes about everything Chloe knows about Wilson, including where he might be staying. The nurse comes back with my discharge papers and instructions about watching for breathing problems. Chloe drives me to my car at the shop where there's still glass everywhere and yellow tape across the door. My phone starts buzzing with texts from people asking if I'm okay. Someone already posted a video of Wilson getting arrested and it has thousands of views in just a few hours. The comments are brutal, with most people blaming Chloe for hiring him in the first place. They're saying she should have seen the warning signs and never let him work there. Chloe calls a locksmith to meet us at the shop to secure everything before dark. We wait in the car watching people slow down to look at the damage. The locksmith arrives and starts measuring for a metal grate to go over the new door. A boarding company shows up to cover the broken window with plywood. Every bang of the hammer makes me flinch, and Chloe grabs my hand each time. The locksmith drills holes for the grate mounting, and the sound reminds me of the crowbar hitting glass. It takes them 2 hours to secure everything, and Chloe writes them checks with shaking hands. That evening, I'm trying to eat dinner when Penn calls my cell. She says Wilson made bail, but they put a GPS ankle monitor on him. He can't come within 500 feet of the shop or either of our homes. If he violates it even once, he goes straight to jail. I still get up 3 times to check that my apartment door is locked. Chloe texts asking if I'll come stay at her place because she's too scared to be alone. I pack a bag and drive over even though I'm exhausted and my shoulder is killing me. We end up on her couch watching dumb comedies and pretending to laugh at the jokes. Every time a car drives by outside, we both tense up and look at the window. Neither of us mentions it, but we're both listening for footsteps or breaking glass. Around midnight, we try to sleep but keep checking our phones every few minutes. At 2 in the morning, a car door slams outside and I'm instantly wide awake. My heart is pounding and I grab my phone ready to call 911. Chloe's awake too, and we're both frozen on the couch, not even breathing. We listen for more sounds and finally hear voices and realize it's just her neighbor coming home late from a bar. Neither of us slept much after that, and when the sun came up, we headed to the shop to meet the contractors Chloe had called. The main guy walked around the storefront shaking his head and running his hands along the door frame, then pulled out a chunk of wood that just crumbled in his fingers. He showed us how Wilson hadn't just smashed the glass, but had bent the whole metal frame out of shape when he was swinging that crowbar, and now the entire thing needed replacing instead of just new glass. He typed numbers into his phone and showed Chloe the new estimate, which was double what she'd expected, and her face went white. While the contractors measured and took photos, we started going through the smashed display cases with a clipboard, checking what was still there against Chloe's inventory sheets. The big pieces were mostly accounted for, but tons of smaller stuff was missing. Rings and bracelets that added up to about $3,000 gone. Chloe kept saying Wilson must have grabbed handfuls while he was destroying everything, but there was no way to prove what he took versus what might have just gotten lost in all that broken glass. She wanted to open back up right away, even with the board still covering half the storefront because she was bleeding money every day they stayed closed. I told her I wasn't ready to be back in that space yet, and she got mad, saying she understood I was scared, but she had bills to pay and couldn't afford to wait until I felt better. We stood there arguing in front of the boarded window, and I could tell she was about to cry from frustration when a car pulled up and her landlord got out looking pissed. He walked straight up to us demanding to know what happened to his property and whether Chloe's insurance was going to cover all the damage. He kept pointing at the plywood and the bent door frame, saying this was exactly the kind of trouble he didn't need, and maybe it was time to think about whether a jewelry store was really the right fit for his building. Chloe tried explaining about the restraining order and how Wilson was wearing an ankle monitor now, but the landlord just shook his head and said he'd think about whether to renew her lease when it came up in 3 months. After he left, Chloe's phone rang, and it was someone from the prosecutor's office saying they were charging Wilson with assault, burglary, vandalism, and theft. The woman on the phone said her name was Danielle Mayer, and she'd be handling the case, and I'd probably need to testify if Wilson didn't take a plea deal. She gave us her direct number and said to call if we remembered any other details about the attack. That night, I was heating up soup when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a blocked number. The voice was muffled, but I could still make out the words telling me I should think real carefully about what I say to the cops about Wilson. My hand started shaking because I recognized the voice as someone who used to work at Chloe's shop with Wilson, another guy who'd quit a few months back. I called Penn right away and played her the message over the phone. She came to my apartment within an hour with a notebook and had me write down everything I remembered about the voice and what exactly was said. She helped me file a report about the threat, and then pulled out a map of my neighborhood, marking different routes I could take home from work and the gym. She gave me her personal cell number and 2 other emergency contacts, plus suggested we come up with a code word I could text Chloe if something felt wrong, and we picked inventory, since it would seem normal for the shop. Penn also showed me how to share my location with Chloe's phone, and suggested I vary my routine so nobody could predict where I'd be. Before she left, she mentioned a self-defense class at the community center that was starting next week, and thought it might help me feel more in control. I signed up online that night, and the instructor emailed me right back with links to videos about staying aware of your surroundings and basic escape moves if someone grabs you. The next day, we went back to the shop to keep cleaning up, and I was sweeping glass into a dustpan when I felt something slice into my palm. Blood started dripping onto the floor, and Chloe rushed over with the first aid kit, wrapping my hand while we both just stood there realizing how messed up this all was. She kept apologizing while she taped the bandage, and I noticed her hands had little cuts all over them too from handling broken pieces all morning. We were both walking around damaged, trying to put things back together while our bodies kept finding new ways to remind us what happened here. The insurance adjuster showed up while my hand was still throbbing and started taking photos of everything, but he kept making comments about how some of the display cases looked old already and asking if we were sure they were all in perfect condition before. Chloe had to dig through her phone finding photos from the week before that showed all the cases intact, and even then he kept suggesting that some of the damage might have been there already. He measured every crack and documented each broken piece, but you could tell he was looking for ways to pay out less money. Chloe pulled up receipts on her laptop showing when she'd bought each display case and how much they cost new, but the adjuster just kept writing in his notebook and saying he'd have to review everything with his supervisor. We spent 2 hours going through every damaged item while he questioned whether things were really worth what Chloe claimed and whether Wilson had actually caused all the damage or if some of it was wear and tear. The adjuster finally left after 3 hours, and Chloe slumped against the counter looking defeated. We locked up and walked to the coffee shop down the street where she ordered 2 lattes with shaky hands. She stirred sugar into her cup for way too long before looking up at me with red eyes. She said she knew Wilson had a temper when she hired him, but the shop was so busy during the holidays that she needed the help. She'd seen him get mad at customers who took too long deciding, and once he'd punched the wall in the back room when a shipment came in wrong. But he showed up on time and could move heavy boxes, and she kept telling herself it would be fine once the busy season ended. I pushed my coffee away and told her straight up that I'd keep helping, but only if she promised to put safety first from now on. No more ignoring red flags just to keep the shop running. She nodded and pulled out her phone to look up security companies while I made a list of new rules like always having 2 people in the shop and installing more cameras. We were still writing everything down when my phone rang with a number I didn't know. The guy on the other end said he was a reporter from the local paper and wanted our side of the story because Wilson's friends were posting all over social media saying Chloe owed him thousands in commissions. I told him we'd only give facts about the attack and nothing else, then hung up when he kept pushing for more details. My phone immediately rang again, and this time it was my mom who'd seen the news story online. She was crying and begging me to stop helping at the shop because no amount of money was worth getting killed over. I couldn't really argue with her and promised to think about it, but we both knew I wasn't going to abandon Chloe now. 3 days later, we sat in the back row of the courtroom for Wilson's bail hearing. The prosecutor wanted him held without bail, but the judge decided to keep him out with more rules instead. Wilson had to do random drug tests, couldn't drink any alcohol, and had to be home by 8 every night. Penn leaned over and whispered that this was normal for assault cases, even though it felt wrong to me. The judge kept going, saying the GPS monitor would send an alert if Wilson came within 500 feet of the shop, our apartments, or the courthouse. If he violated any of these rules, he'd go straight to jail. Wilson stood there in a suit that didn't fit right, nodding at everything the judge said while his lawyer, Conrad Lowe, kept putting his hand on Wilson's shoulder. The next week, Chloe and I spent the whole morning at her kitchen table getting ready for the restraining order hearing. We had printed out every threatening text, photos of all the damage, copies of the police reports, medical records from my ER visit, and witness statements from people who'd seen Wilson's behavior at the shop before. The stack of papers was almost 2 inches thick, and looking at it all together made my stomach hurt. In court that afternoon, Wilson's lawyer stood up and called the whole thing a misunderstanding about wages that got out of hand. He said Wilson was just trying to collect money he was owed and things escalated when we wouldn't listen to him. The judge cut him off and asked if he was really trying to minimize an attack with a deadly weapon. Conrad Lowe started to answer, but the judge was already looking through our evidence pile. She spent 10 minutes reading everything while we all sat there in silence. Then she looked up and said she was granting a 3-year restraining order covering both me and Chloe plus the shop location. Wilson couldn't contact us directly or through other people and had to turn in any guns or weapons he owned within 24 hours. We walked out of the courtroom and immediately some guy started filming us with his phone. Chloe asked him to stop, but he kept recording and asking if we had any comment about the case. 2 court security officers came over and told the guy to leave, then walked us through a back hallway to the parking garage. One of them stayed with us until we got to our cars and made sure nobody else was following us. Chloe hugged me in the parking garage and we both started crying because it felt like we could finally breathe again, even though we knew this wasn't really over. The next morning, a woman from Victim Services called and walked me through applying for compensation funds that could cover my medical bills and the days I'd missed from my regular job. She explained the forms I needed to fill out and where to get copies of my medical records, then connected me with a therapist who specialized in violent crime victims. My first appointment was 3 days later in a small office downtown, where the therapist had me describe exactly what happened, and when I got to the part about the crowbar against my throat, my hand went up to touch the spot without thinking. She showed me this grounding exercise where I press my feet flat on the floor and count 5 things I can see, 4 I can hear, 3 I can touch, 2 I can smell, and 1 I can taste, which sounds dumb, but actually helped when the memories started feeling too real. Meanwhile, Chloe decided to do a soft reopening with just her regular customers who'd been texting, asking when she'd be back, keeping the boarded section up while contractors worked on permanent repairs. I helped her that first morning back and watched 3 different customers bring flowers, and one older lady brought a whole tray of cookies, which made Chloe cry, and then I was crying too because people were being so nice. The insurance adjuster finally called after 3 weeks of back and forth with a check that covered most of the damage, plus enough extra for Chloe to upgrade the whole security system with better cameras that recorded to the cloud and panic buttons in 3 spots instead of just 1. Detective Penn called me 2 days later saying Wilson had taken a plea deal for 2 years probation with anger management classes, and monthly restitution payments to cover what insurance didn't, which meant no prison time, but at least we wouldn't have to testify at trial. I'd been going to self-defense classes at the community center, and during my third class, the instructor had me practice breaking out of different holds. And when he grabbed me from behind in a chokehold, I remembered the steps, and actually broke free on my first try. The instructor said my muscle memory was developing faster than most students, and I actually believed I might be able to defend myself better if something happened again. 3 weeks after the attack, Chloe and I had this whole new routine where we texted each other. When we got home safe every night, the shop always had at least 2 people working even during slow times, and we'd move the panic buttons to spots near the door, register, and back office. We weren't the same people we'd been before Wilson smashed through that door, but we were functioning, getting through each day without jumping at every sound. Looking back from where we are now, we're not magically healed or anything, but the shop is more secure than it's ever been with the new cameras. And alarms. We both have therapists we see regularly. Wilson can't come near us without going straight to jail. And most importantly, we've proven to ourselves that we can survive the worst thing we could imagine and keep going. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Seriously. Life's always throwing lessons at us if we actually stop and pay attention. Until we cross paths again, my friend. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.